My grandmother always warned me that grief makes people do strange things, but she never mentioned it turns family into vultures. When she died, my Uncle Gordon looked me in the eye and swore there was no will. Just a vague promise to handle things fairly. But fairness does not involve emptying safe deposit boxes 2 days after a funeral. They thought I was the quiet, forgettable one. They forgot that the quiet ones are the only ones actually listening. The drive back to Briar Glen, Massachusetts, felt like moving backward through time, but not in the way nostalgia usually promises. The town hadn't changed, but the air felt heavier, thickened by the gray, damp wool of a New England October. I was 33 years old, yet as my car tires crunched over the wet gravel of the funeral home parking lot, I felt the familiar, shrinking sensation of being the youngest, the quietest, the one everyone assumed would simply go along with whatever plan the adults in the room decided was best. The difference this time was that the only adult who had ever treated me with genuine respect was the one lying inside the casket. My grandmother, Eleanor Collins, had been the anchor of a family that otherwise would have drifted into total dysfunction. She was sharp, deliberate, and fiercely protective of her independence. When she died, the call I received from my Uncle Gordon had been brief, lacking the hollowed-out tone of true grief. He had sounded efficient. He had sounded like a man checking a box on a list of chores he wanted finished before the weekend. I parked my sedan between a hearse and a luxury SUV that belonged to my cousin, Evan. I took a moment to breathe, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I told myself to be strong. I told myself that I was here to honor her, not to fight them. But as soon as I stepped out into the mist, I felt it, the coldness. It wasn't the weather. It was the way the heavy oak doors of the funeral home opened and my Aunt Tricia stepped out, spotting me instantly. Her eyes didn't soften. She didn't rush forward to embrace me. Instead, she checked her watch. "You made it," she said, her voice tight. "We were wondering if you got lost. I have driven this route 1,000 times. "Aunt Tricia," I said, walking past her. She fell in step beside me, her heels clicking rapidly on the pavement. "Well, we have a lot to get through today. People are already arriving. Just try to keep it together." "Madeline, we don't need a scene." I stopped and looked at her. "A scene? My grandmother just died." Tricia adjusted the collar of her black coat, avoiding my eyes. "You know what I mean. Eleanor liked dignity. Let us maintain that." Inside, the viewing room was suffocating with the scent of lilies and the hushed, performative murmuring of distant relatives. I made my way to the front, my legs feeling heavy, and looked at my grandmother. She looked peaceful, which was a mercy, but she also looked small, too small to have held so much power over this family for so long. I stood there for a long time, letting the tears fall silently, ignoring Tricia's warning. I placed my hand over her cold hand, whispering a promise that I would look after her garden, that I wouldn't let the hydrangeas die. It was a silly thing to promise, but it was the only thing I could think of that she would actually care about. When I finally turned around, the dynamic in the room shifted. My Uncle Gordon was standing near the entrance, shaking hands with a local councilman. He looked the part of the grieving son perfectly. Somber suit, bowed head, a handkerchief clutched in one hand, but his eyes were darting around the room, scanning the faces, scanning the exits. I walked over to him, Uncle Gordon. He looked down at me, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Madeline, good of you to come," I frowned. "Of course I came." "She was my grandmother." Yes, naturally," he said, patting my shoulder with a hand that felt too heavy. "Look, we need to talk later, briefly, just to get some logistics out of the way." "Logistics?" I asked. "The funeral hasn't even started." Gordon sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "Life goes on. Madeline, bills don't stop just because hearts stop. We need to be practical." I stepped away from him, needing air. I circulated through the room, accepting condolences from people who actually knew Eleanor, her bridge partners, the librarian, the man who delivered her groceries. Their grief felt real. They spoke of her kindness, her sharp wit, her generosity. But my family? They were moving with a different energy. I found a quiet corner near a heavy velvet curtain and watched. That was when I saw it. Aunt Tricia was standing near a floral arrangement, her back partially turned to the room, speaking into her cell phone. She had her hand cupped over her mouth, but I was close enough to hear the urgent hiss of her voice. "We need to get the bank stuff handled before Monday," she whispered. "No, listen to me. If we wait, it gets complicated. Just do it." My stomach twisted. Monday was 3 days away. Why the rush? Why the secrecy? I turned my gaze to my cousin Evan. He was standing near the table where the guest book and condolence cards were displayed. Usually, a family member stands there to thank people for coming. Evan, however, wasn't greeting anyone. He was methodically picking up the envelopes people had left, cards that often contained checks or cash to help with expenses or to be donated to charity. I watched as he opened one, peeked inside, and then slid it into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. Then he took another. He wasn't reading the messages. He was inventorying them. He looked like a man counting receipts at the end of a business day, not a grandson at a funeral. I walked over to him. "Evan!" He jumped, his hand freezing halfway to his pocket. "Maddie, you startled me." "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "Collecting the cards," he said smoothly, recovering his composure. "We don't want them getting lost. People can be careless." I stared at the bulge in his jacket. "I think the funeral director handles that." "Evan." He gave me a condescending smile, the kind he had used since we were teenagers. "You have been away a long time." "Maddie, things work differently here. We handle our own affairs." I felt a sudden flare of anger, hot and sharp. "I haven't been away that long. I was here 2 months ago for her birthday." Evan shrugged, turning away. 2 months is a long time when someone is declining," he said, dismissing me. The service itself was a blur. I sat in the second row, behind Gordon and Tricia, watching the back of their heads. They sat stiffly, their shoulders touching, a united front. I felt entirely alone. After the burial, the immediate family gathered at Gordon's house. It was a sprawling colonial on the wealthy side of Briar Glen, a house that always felt more like a showroom than a home. We sat in the living room, holding cups of lukewarm coffee. The silence was thick. But it wasn't the silence of shared sorrow. It was the silence of people waiting for a negotiation to begin. Gordon cleared his throat and set his cup down on a coaster. "Well," he said, "it is a hard day, but Eleanor would want us to be organized." I looked up. "Organized about what?" "About the estate," Tricia said quickly. "The house, the possessions, the accounts." I straightened in my chair. "Is there a will?" I asked. "Who is the executor?" The room seemed to drop a few degrees. Gordon exchanged a look with Evan, then turned his gaze to me. His expression was one of pity, as if he were explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "There was no will." "Madeline," Gordon said. The words hung in the air, heavy and false. "What?" I asked. "That doesn't sound like Grandma. She was meticulous. She labeled her spice jars with dates. You think she didn't write a will? People get old." "Maddie," Evan said from the corner, where he was nursing a scotch. "They forget. They procrastinate. She probably thought she had more time." I shook my head. "No, she told me she had a plan. She told me specifically." "I have everything arranged." Gordon leaned forward, clasping his hands. "She may have intended to, but we have searched the house. We have checked with her usual contacts. Nothing, which means she died intestate." I felt the blood drain from my face. "So what happens now?" Gordon smiled, a tight, benevolent grimace. "We handle it as a family. We have already discussed it. Actually, since there is no will, the law is complicated, time-consuming. We want to avoid probate if possible. We have drawn up a family agreement." He reached for a folder on the coffee table and slid it toward me. "It is simple, really," Tricia added. "We split the personal items, jewelry, furniture, keepsakes. You can take whatever sentimental things you want, within reason, and the money, well, we deal with the money later. Once the debts are paid," I didn't open the folder. Deal with the money later? What does that mean? It means liquid assets take time to unfreeze, Gordon said, his voice hardening slightly. Look, Madeline, you are grieving. We all are. We are trying to save you the headache of legal battles. Just sign the agreement, take the things that remind you of her, and let us handle the heavy lifting. I looked at them. Gordon, the successful real estate developer who always lived slightly beyond his means. Tricia, who leased a new luxury car every year. Evan, who had never held a job for more than 6 months. They looked at me with predatory patience. I need time, I said, standing up. Gordon's eyes narrowed. Time for what? To process, I said. I am not signing anything today. Tricia stood up too. Madeline, don't be difficult. We are trying to help you. I walked to the door. I'm going to Grandma's house. I need to be there. Gordon stood up abruptly. You can't stay there. Why not? I asked. It is not prepared, he said, stumbling over the word. We have shut off the heat to save money. Stay here, or get a hotel. I have a coat. I said, I will be fine. I walked out before they could stop me. As I got into my car, I saw the curtains move in the living room window. They were watching me, and for the first time, I realized that my grief was the only thing protecting me. If I hadn't been so visibly upset, they might have pushed harder, but they assumed I was weak. They assumed I was just emotional Maddie, running away to cry. They were wrong. I drove to my grandmother's house on Elm Street. It was a Victorian cottage painted a soft yellow, surrounded by the gardens she had tended for 40 years. I let myself in with the spare key she kept under the ceramic frog by the back door, a key Gordon and the others apparently hadn't bothered to remove yet. The house smelled of lavender and old paper, a scent that instantly brought tears to my eyes. But as I walked through the kitchen, the feeling of sanctuary evaporated. It was too clean. My grandmother was tidy, but she lived in her house. There were usually stacks of mail on the counter, a half-finished crossword puzzle, a few teacups drying by the sink. Now, the counters were bare. The mail was gone. The surfaces had been wiped down with a chemical cleaner that lingered in the air, masking the lavender. They had been here. They had been here before the funeral. I walked into the living room. Her collection of porcelain birds was gone. The silver picture frames were missing from the mantelpiece. They hadn't just cleaned. They had looted. I felt a wave of nausea. I went into the kitchen to make tea, just to have something to do with my hands. I reached for her favorite cookbook, a battered edition of Joy of Cooking that she had used since the 1960s. It was on the high shelf, one of the few things they hadn't taken. I pulled it down and it fell open to the cake section. A white envelope fluttered out and landed on the floor. I picked it up. It was a birthday card, the one she had given me 2 months ago. I had left it here by accident. Tucking it into the book while we were baking together, I opened it, reading her shaky cursive. To my dearest Maddie, never let the world make you hard, but never let it make you soft, either. Love, Grandma. But then I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to at the time. Below her signature, in a slightly different ink, as if she had come back to write it later, was a line of text. If they pretend my words don't exist, look where I kept my quiet. I stared at the sentence. If they pretend my words don't exist. She knew. She knew they would try to say there was no will. And the second part? Look where I kept my quiet. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. What did that mean? Where did she keep her quiet? I closed the book and walked into her study. This was where she paid her bills and wrote her letters. The desk was a beautiful mahogany piece, heavy and solid. I sat in her chair, feeling like an imposter. I opened the drawers, empty, every single one. No pens, no paper clips, no files, just bare wood. They had stripped it clean. I pulled the center drawer out all the way. Checking the back, nothing. I pulled the side drawers, nothing. Frustration welled up in my throat. I slammed the bottom drawer shut, but it didn't catch properly. I crouched down to see what was blocking it. I reached my hand into the cavity of the desk, feeling the underside of the drawer above it. My fingers brushed against rough, splintered wood. I pulled my hand back and shone the flashlight from my phone into the gap. There was a fresh, jagged scratch on the underside of the top drawer. The wood was light, the varnish stripped away in a violent gouge. It looked like something had been taped there, or wedged there, and then ripped out in a hurry. Someone had reached in, grabbed whatever was hidden, and pulled it free with enough force to damage the furniture. I sat back on my heels, the silence of the house pressing in on me. They had found it. Whatever she had hidden in the desk, they had found it. I stood up, needing to get out of the room. I walked out the front door and stood on the porch, taking deep breaths of the cold night air. Maddie? I jumped. Nora Vance, my grandmother's next-door neighbor, was standing by the hedge that separated their properties. She was wearing a thick cardigan and holding a trowel, though it was far too dark for gardening. "Mrs. Vance," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I didn't see you there. I saw the lights," she said, walking over. "I am so sorry." "Honey, she was a good woman, the best. Thank you," I said. "I saw your uncle's car here yesterday," Nora said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And the day before, they were hauling boxes out like the house was on fire." My stomach tightened. "Did you see what was in them?" Nora shook her head. "Just files, mostly, and that silver tea set she loved. Seems mighty fast, doesn't it?" "It does," I said. Nora leaned closer, resting her arms on the porch railing. "You know, Eleanor talked about you all the time. She was worried, toward the end." "Worried about what?" "About them," Nora said, jerking her head toward the street, implying my family. "She said they were circling like sharks, but she told me, 'My will is done, Nora. I am not leaving Maddie unprotected.'" Those were her exact words. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "She said her will was done?" "As done as dinner," Nora said firmly. "She went to that fancy lawyer in town, Hale and something. She was proud of it. Said she finally had peace of mind." I gripped the railing. "They told me there was no will. Mrs. Vance. They said she died intestate." Nora's eyes widened, and her mouth set into a grim line. "Then they are liars. Maddie. Plain and simple. Eleanor Collins didn't leave things to chance." I thanked Nora and went back inside. But I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen chair, watching the sun come up, the birthday card sitting on the table in front of me. Look where I kept my quiet. The desk was empty, the house was compromised, but Nora had given me a name. Hale, the next morning, Monday. I waited until the clock struck 9. I drove to the local branch of Harbor and Pine Federal Credit Union. This was where my grandmother had banked for 50 years. If there was a paper trail, it would start here. I walked up to the teller window. The young woman behind the glass looked tired. "Hi," I said. "My name is Madeline Collins. My grandmother, Eleanor Collins, passed away last week." The teller's face softened. "Oh, I am so sorry. Mrs. Collins was a lovely lady. She always brought us cookies at Christmas." "Thank you," I said. "I am trying to sort out some of her affairs. I know I probably can't access the accounts yet, but I wanted to check if there were any automatic payments I needed to stop, or if she had a safe deposit box that needs to be inventoried." The teller typed Eleanor's name into her computer. "Let me check for you." She frowned, clicking her mouse a few times. "That is strange." "What is it?" I asked. "Well, you are not listed as an authorized user on the main checking account," she said. "But regarding the safe deposit box, it says here it was closed out." I froze. "Closed out? When?" She squinted at the screen. 2 days ago, Saturday morning, Saturday, the day after she died, the day before the funeral." "Who closed it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The teller hesitated. "I shouldn't really. Let me see. It just says administrator access. Usually, that means the executor or a joint holder. But there is no executor yet." I said. "The court hasn't appointed one." The teller looked confused. "Well, the system says it was emptied and the keys were surrendered. Maybe you should talk to the branch manager?" "No," I said quickly, sensing that if I pushed too hard, she would clam up completely. "Thank you. You have been very helpful." I walked out of the bank, my legs shaking. They had emptied the box. That was what Trisha had meant about handling the bank stuff. They had rushed in there, likely using some document they had bullied out of her or forged, and taken everything before I even arrived in town. I sat in my car and pulled out my phone. I searched for Hale Estate Attorney Briar Glenn. Hale and Mercer Estate Services. I dialed the number. Hale and Mercer. How may I direct your call? The receptionist answered, her voice crisp and professional. Hi, this is Madeline Collins. I am calling regarding the estate of my grandmother. Eleanor Collins. I believe she was a client of your firm. There was a pause on the line, a long, heavy pause. Hello? I asked. One moment, please, the receptionist said. Her voice had changed. The professional crispness was gone, replaced by a wary tension. I was put on hold. Terrible classical music played for 5 minutes. Finally, the receptionist came back. Ms. Collins? Yes, I am afraid Mr. Mercer is unavailable indefinitely. Indefinitely? I asked. What does that mean? Is he ill? Is he on vacation? He is taking a leave of absence, she recited, sounding like she was reading from a script. We are not taking inquiries regarding the Collins file at this time, but I need to know if you hold her will. I pressed. I am her granddaughter. I cannot help you. Ms. Collins. Please do not call again. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. They were stonewalling me. The bank, the lawyers, my family. It was a coordinated effort to erase the truth. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, driving around Briar Glen, feeling the walls closing in. I went back to the house that evening, feeling more exhausted than I had ever felt in my life. I heated up a can of soup and ate it standing over the sink. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Area code 617, Boston. I opened the message. Stop digging. You'll lose more than money. I stared at the words, the white letters glowing against the dark background. A threat. An explicit threat. My first instinct was fear. I wanted to pack my bag, get in my car, and drive back to my quiet life in the city. I wanted to pretend none of this was happening. I wanted to be the forgettable one again. But then, a strange thing happened. The fear began to recede, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. If there really was no will, if there really was nothing to hide, they wouldn't need to threaten me. They wouldn't need to empty safe deposit boxes on a Saturday. They wouldn't need to silence lawyers. They were scared. My Uncle Gordon, with his councilman friends and his arrogance, my Aunt Tricia with her nervous whispers, my cousin Evan with his greedy hands. They were terrified that I would find out what they had done. They thought they were dealing with the old Madeline, the one who stayed quiet, the one who folded under pressure. I looked at the birthday card again. Look where I kept my quiet. I didn't know what that meant yet, but I was going to find out. I put the phone down on the counter. I didn't reply to the text. I didn't call Gordon to scream at him. I didn't cry. I washed my bowl and spoon, dried them, and put them away. I was done being the victim. This wasn't a family tragedy anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was going to take it apart, piece by piece. I would start tomorrow. I would find a lawyer who wasn't in their pocket. I would prove the will existed, and I would make them regret the day they decided to steal from the only person who had ever loved us all unconditionally. I turned off the kitchen light and walked into the darkness of the hallway. For the first time since I arrived, I didn't feel alone. I felt my grandmother's anger alongside my own, a quiet, steady flame that would burn this whole lie to the ground. I knew I could not hire a lawyer in Briar Glen. The town was too small. The connections between families too old and tangled. My Uncle Gordon played golf with the local judges. My Aunt Tricia was on the charity board with the wives of the prominent litigators. If I wanted someone who would look at my family and see defendants rather than dinner guests, I had to go elsewhere. I drove 40 minutes north to Stonebrook, a city of steel and glass that felt like a different universe compared to the clapboard charm of my grandmother's town. The rain was falling in sheets, battering the windshield of my car, a relentless gray drumming that matched the steady, cold anger growing in my chest. Sophie Langford's office was on the 14th floor of a building that smelled of lemon polish and expensive coffee. Sophie herself was a woman of sharp angles and sharper eyes, wearing a suit that looked like it could cut glass. She didn't offer me tea or sympathy. She offered me a seat and a notepad. "Tell me what you know, not what you feel," Sophie said, uncapping a pen. "Feelings are valid, but they are not evidence." I took a breath and laid it out. The empty desk, the missing will, the rush to close the safe deposit box 2 days after death, the frozen-out attorney, the text message threat. Sophie listened without interrupting, her pen scratching rhythmically across the paper. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me. "They are playing a classic game. Madeline," she said, her voice cool and measured. "It is called suppression. If a will disappears, the estate follows the laws of intestacy. In Massachusetts, without a surviving spouse, that means the estate is divided equally among the children. Your father is deceased, correct?" "Yes," I said. "I am his only child. Then under intestacy, your Uncle Gordon, your Aunt Tricia, and you, standing in your father's place, would likely split everything 3 ways. I frowned. "But that is still a fair split. Why hide the will if the result is similar?" Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Is it similar? Do you know what was in that will?" "No," I admitted. "Exactly. Maybe your grandmother didn't want a 3-way split. Maybe she knew your uncle has debts. Maybe she knew your aunt has a spending problem. Maybe she left everything to you. Or maybe she left it all to a cat shelter. The point is, if the will vanishes, they control the narrative, they control the assets, and most importantly, they control the timeline." She leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Families hide wills for 2 reasons: greed or fear, usually both. If they are rushing to liquidate assets and hide paper trails, they are terrified of what that document says. But how do I prove it existed?" I asked. "They stripped the house. We don't need the physical paper yet," Sophie said. "We need to create pressure. We need to force them to lie on the record." "Lie on the record?" Sophie nodded. "We file a petition to compel production of the will. We subpoena the drafting attorney. We subpoena the bank records. If they swear under oath that no will exists, and we later find evidence that it did, they are not just looking at a civil loss. They are looking at perjury. They are looking at fraud. Judges hate being lied to. Madeline, it insults their intelligence." She handed me a retainer agreement. "This is going to be ugly. They will gaslight you. They will tell everyone you are crazy. They will try to starve you out financially. Can you handle that?" I thought about the empty drawers in my grandmother's desk. I thought about the scratch on the wood where someone had ripped away her secrets. "I can handle it," I said. "Good," Sophie said. "Then let us get to work. Your first job is to build a timeline. I need dates. I need names. And I need you to find out exactly where she was in those final weeks. If she signed a will, there were witnesses. Find them." I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt since the funeral. I felt armed. The next morning, I went to the town clerk's office to get the death certificate. It was a grim errand. Holding the heavy, embossed paper that reduced my grandmother's vibrant life to a name, a date, and a cause of death: cardiopulmonary arrest. I sat in my car in the parking lot and took out a notebook. I started a timeline, writing down the date of death. October 4th. I wrote down the date of the funeral. October 10th. Then I added the date the safe deposit box was accessed. According to the teller, October 6th, 2 days after she died, while her body was still at the funeral home, waiting to be prepared. The callousness of it made my stomach turn. I needed more. I went back to my grandmother's house. I knew they had taken the obvious files. But Gordon was arrogant. He was the type of man who hired people to clean up his messes, which meant he might have been sloppy himself. I went through the recycling bin in the garage. It was filled with junk mail, catalogs, and flyers. I sorted through every single piece, ignoring the smell of damp paper. Near the bottom, I found it. A bank statement envelope from Harbor and Pine. It had been opened, torn across the top, and then discarded. It must have arrived the day they were cleaning the house, and someone, maybe Evan, had glanced at it and tossed it, thinking it was irrelevant. I smoothed out the crumbled paper. It was a transaction summary for the month of September. I scanned the lines: utility payments, grocery store charges, pharmacy costs, and then, on September 28th, 1 week before she died, a transfer. Transfer to account ending in 409. Amount: $25,000. I stared at the line. The description simply read, "Estate holding in it." Estate holding? My grandmother wasn't dead on September 28th. Why would she be transferring money to an account labeled estate holding? And $25,000 was a huge sum for her to move without a specific reason. She lived off her pension and dividends. She didn't move 5 figures around for fun. It looked like a setup. It looked like someone was preparing an account to receive funds before she was even gone. I took a photo of the statement and emailed it to Sophie. Then I got in my car and drove to Seabrook Care Pavilion. Seabrook was the kind of facility that looked more like a resort than a nursing home. The lobby had a grand piano, fresh hydrangeas, and a smell that was 50% lavender and 50% antiseptic. This was where Eleanor had spent her final 3 months, recovering from a fall that had broken her hip. I approached the front desk. "I am here to pick up Eleanor Collins' personal effects." I lied. "And to speak with the administrator." The receptionist typed something into her computer. "Oh, Ms. Collins, I believe your uncle already collected her things." I smiled, a tight, pained expression. He grabbed the clothes. "But I think he left some of her books. I just want to double-check, and I really need to thank the staff." The receptionist hesitated, then buzzed me through. I walked down the hallway, the beige carpet silencing my footsteps. I found the administrator's office. The plaque on the door read, "Kendra Mott, Director of Resident Services." I knocked and entered. Kendra Mott was a woman in her 40s with perfectly blow-dried blonde hair and a smile that looked practiced in a mirror. She stood up when I entered, smoothing her skirt. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I am Madeline Collins, Eleanor's granddaughter." "Ah," Kendra said, her smile freezing slightly. "We were all so saddened by her passing. She was a delight." I sat down without being asked. "I am just trying to piece together her final weeks." She seemed anxious when I spoke to her on the phone. I wanted to know if she had any visitors outside the family. Lawyers, perhaps? Notaries? Kendra folded her hands on her desk. The gesture was tight, defensive. "We have strict privacy policies, Ms. Collins, but I can tell you that everything was handled properly. Your Uncle Gordon was very involved. He ensured she had everything she needed." "Did she sign any documents here?" I asked. "In the facility?" Kendra blinked. "Documents?" "Legal documents. A will, a trust, anything like that." Kendra shook her head, a fraction too quickly. "Not that I am aware of. Residents handle their own legal affairs. We don't get involved." "Are you sure?" I pressed, because my grandmother mentioned she was working on something. Ms. Mott stood up. "I really cannot speculate. As I said, everything was routine. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a meeting." She was lying. I could see it in the way she refused to make eye contact, focusing instead on a spot over my left shoulder. I left her office, frustration bubbling in my veins. I walked toward the exit, passing the nurse's station. A woman in blue scrubs was organizing charts. She looked up at me, her eyes lingering on my face. "You are Eleanor's granddaughter," she said softly. "You have her eyes." I stopped. "Yes. Did you know her?" "I was her night nurse," the woman said. "I am Sarah." "Sarah," I said, stepping closer to the counter so we wouldn't be overheard. Did she ever talk to you about her family? About money?" Sarah glanced down the hallway toward Kendra's office, then lowered her voice. She was sharp as a tack. "Your grandmother, she didn't miss a thing." I leaned in. "The administrator says she didn't sign any papers here. Is that true?" Sarah hesitated. She looked nervous. She checked the hallway again. "About 2 weeks before she passed." Sarah whispered, "She asked me if I could be a witness. She said she had a paper signing to do." My heart skipped a beat. "Did you do it? Did you witness it?" "No." Sarah said, "I went to get a pen, and when I came back, Kendra was in the room. She told me to leave. She said, I will handle the supervision. Sarah, go check on room 312. Kendra supervised it? I asked. Is that normal? Sarah shook her head. No, Kendra never does floor work. She stays in her office. It was very specific. And when I came back an hour later, your uncle was there. He looked happy. Thank you. Sarah, I said, gripping the counter, you have no idea how much that helps. I walked out of Seabrook with a new piece of the puzzle. Kendra Mott was involved. She had intercepted a witness. She had been in the room with Gordon. They had orchestrated something, and they had done it on their turf, where they controlled the doors and the staff. When I got back to my grandmother's house, I went straight to the guest bedroom closet. I knew my grandmother kept old electronics in a shoebox on the top shelf. She never threw anything away because she was paranoid about data thieves. I found her old iPad. It was 3 generations old, with a cracked screen, but it still held a charge. I plugged it in and waited. She hadn't used it in a year, but the email account was still logged in. I scrolled back, past the endless spam and newsletters. I went back to the spring, before she got sick, before the nursing home. I found an email sent to an address I didn't recognize. dmercerlaw@gmail.com. Subject: Updates. I opened it. Dear Daniel, I need to come in next week. The vultures are circling. I want to make sure the beneficiary updates are ironclad. I need to make sure my executor cannot be bullied. They think I'm getting soft. I need to show them I am not. Cannot be bullied. She knew. She saw Gordon and the rest of them for exactly what they were. I took a screenshot of the email. Daniel Mercer. That matched the firm name. Hale and Mercer. The man who was indefinitely unavailable. My phone buzzed. It was my cousin Evan. Hey, Maddie. Gordon and Mom want to have a family dinner tonight. Gordon's place. 7 o'clock. No heavy talk. Just family. Please come. We want to make sure you are okay. I stared at the screen. A family dinner. It was a trap. I knew it was a trap. They knew I was asking questions at the bank. They knew I had gone to the nursing home. They were circling the wagons. I texted Sophie. They invited me to dinner. Should I go? Sophie replied 2 minutes later. Yes, go. Listen. Agree to nothing. Sign nothing. Watch their hands. I dressed carefully for dinner. I wore a dark blue dress that was conservative but sharp. I put on makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes. I wanted to look composed. I wanted to look like I had nothing to hide and nothing to fear. Gordon's house was warm and smelled of roasting meat. It was a perfect domestic scene. Trisha was arranging flowers in the hallway. Evan was mixing drinks at the wet bar. Gordon was stoking the fire. Madeline, Gordon boomed, coming forward to hug me. I stiffened but let him do it. You look tired, sweetheart. It has been a long week, I said. Come, sit, he said, guiding me to the dining table. We ordered catering from that Italian place you like. The one with the truffle risotto. We sat down. The conversation was painful. They asked about my job in the city, marketing for a nonprofit, which they always considered cute, but not a real career. They asked about my apartment. They reminisced about Eleanor, but their stories felt flat, rehearsed. They talked about her baking, her garden, safe, shallow topics. Then, the plates were cleared. Evan poured more wine, filling my glass to the brim. Gordon leaned back in his chair, dabbing his mouth with a linen napkin. So, Maddie, he began, his voice dropping to a serious, paternal register. We have been thinking, here it comes. We know this situation with the estate is messy. Trisha chimed in, smiling nervously. Without a will, the probate process takes months, years, sometimes, and legal fees eat up everything. Evan added, It is a disaster. We want to protect you from that. Gordon said, You are young. You have your life in the city. You don't want to be dragging yourself back here for court dates and hearings. He reached under the table and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. We drew this up, Gordon said. It is a family settlement agreement. I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. What does it say? Basically, Evan said, leaning forward. "It says that we agree to settle the estate privately. We buy out your share of the inheritance now. Cash. Immediate. No waiting for the courts. And how much is my share?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Gordon cleared his throat. "We did some calculations. After debts, the mortgage on the house, the funeral costs. We are prepared to offer you $150,000. $150,000. My grandmother's house alone was worth $800,000. Her investment portfolio, from what I remembered years ago, was substantial. And the trust. If there was a trust, it could be millions. They were trying to buy me off for pennies. And in exchange?" I asked. "In exchange, you waive any further claims to the estate," Gordon said. "You sign. We cut you a check tomorrow, and you can go back to your life. You can buy a condo. You can travel. It is a lot of money. Madeline." I looked around the table. Tricia was watching me with a look of desperate hope. Her hand was gripping the stem of her wine glass so hard her knuckles were white. Evan was smirking slightly, as if he had already spent his share. Gordon was watching me like a poker player waiting for a fold. They were sweating. If I signed this, their crimes would be buried forever. The missing will, the looted safe deposit box, the coerced signatures. It all went away. I reached out and opened the folder. I scanned the document. It was thick, full of legal jargon. Release of all claims, covenant not to sue, confidentiality clause. "Who drafted this?" I asked, looking up. Gordon blinked. "What? Who wrote this?" I asked. "If there is no estate lawyer, did you write it?" "Gordon? A friend of mine," Gordon said quickly. "A contract specialist." "I see." I said. I closed the folder. "Well?" Evan asked. "I can't sign this tonight." I said. The air left the room instantly. Tricia let out a small, sharp breath. Gordon's face turned a shade of red that clashed with the wallpaper. "Why not?" Gordon asked, his voice losing its paternal warmth. "Because it is a legal document," I said. "I need to read it properly. I need to understand the tax implications." "It is tax-free," Evan said. "It is an inheritance advance. Just sign it." "Maddie, don't make this complicated." "I am not making it complicated." "Evan, I am making it careful. Grandma would want me to be careful." Gordon slammed his hand down on the table. The silverware rattled. "Stop hiding behind her memory. Madeline," he shouted, "we are offering you a lifeline. If you go to court, you will get nothing. The lawyers will take it all." I looked at him. His anger was disproportionate. It wasn't frustration. It was panic. "Why are you yelling?" "Uncle Gordon?" I asked softly. "If there is no will, and this is just a generous offer, why are you so angry that I want a day to think about it?" Gordon stared at me, his chest heaving. He realized he had slipped. He realized he had shown his teeth. "I am not angry," he said, lowering his voice with effort. "I am just stressed. We all are." I stood up, picking up the folder. "I will take this with me. I will let you know in 48 hours. You can't take it," Evan said, standing up to block my path. I looked him in the eye. He was taller than me, but he had always been a coward. "Are you going to tackle me, Evan, at the dinner table?" He hesitated, glancing at his father. Gordon gave a curt nod, signaling him to stand down. "Go," Gordon said coldly. "Take it, but the offer expires in 2 days. After that, we do this the hard way." I walked out of the house, clutching the folder to my chest. My legs didn't start shaking until I was inside my car with the doors locked. I drove straight to a 24-hour diner and called Sophie. They offered me $150,000. I said, "Lowball." Sophie said instantly, "Insultingly low." "They are terrified. They gave me a settlement agreement. Don't sign it. Obviously, I won't. But Sophie," I saw their faces. "They are ready to fight. Then let's give them a war." Sophie said, "I am drafting the petition tonight. We are filing in Briar Glen Probate Court tomorrow morning. We are going to compel the production of the will. But we don't know where the will is." I said, "No." Sophie said, "But we know who drafted it. We are naming Daniel Mercer in the firm, and we are naming your uncle as the person in possession of the assets. The next day, the petition was filed. In the matter of the estate of Eleanor Collins, petition to compel production of will and request for formal probate. The reaction was immediate. It didn't come in the form of a legal response, not at first. It came in the form of whispers. I went to the grocery store to buy milk. The cashier, a woman who had known me since I was a child, wouldn't meet my eyes. "I heard you're having a hard time," she muttered as she scanned my items. "Excuse me?" I asked. "Your aunt was in here this morning. She said, she was saying how worried they are about you, saying you are unstable, that the grief has made you confused." I felt the blood rush to my face. "Unstable?" "She said you are demanding money that doesn't exist." The cashier continued, finally looking at me with a mix of pity and judgment. "She said you always had problems, even as a kid." I walked out of the store, leaving the milk on the counter. They were painting me as the greedy, mentally ill granddaughter. They were poisoning the well. They knew that in a small town, reputation was everything. If they could make people believe I was crazy, then any evidence I found would be dismissed as the fabrications of a disturbed woman. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, unstable, greedy, problem child. They were using my silence against me. They thought that because I didn't scream, I was weak. They thought that because I didn't fight back in the grocery store, I was losing. But they were wrong. I wasn't the problem child. I was the problem solver. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo of the bank statement again. Estate holding. I wasn't going to argue with them in the streets of Briar Glen. I wasn't going to try to convince the cashier or the neighbors. I was going to let them talk. I was going to let them spread their lies. Because every lie they told was just another brick they were laying in the wall of their own prison. I texted Sophie. "They are smearing me. They are telling everyone I'm crazy." Sophie's reply came back, calm and professional. "Let them. It shows malice. Focus on the timeline. Did you find the notary?" I looked at the notes I had made from my conversation with Sarah the nurse. Notary. Sarah hadn't mentioned a notary's name, only that Kendra Mott had supervised the signing. But a paper signing required a notary, and if Kendra Mott was involved, she would use someone she trusted, someone who wouldn't ask questions. I started searching online for mobile notaries in Briar Glen. There were only 3. I would visit all of them. The war had started, and my family had just made their first fatal mistake. They had underestimated how much abuse I was willing to take to get to the truth. They thought the money was the weapon. They didn't realize that the truth was the bomb. And I was the one holding the match. 3 days after I refused the settlement offer, the silence from my family was total. They stopped calling. They stopped texting. Even the whispers in town seemed to quiet down, replaced by a watchful tension. It was the calm before a storm, the kind of heavy, static-charged atmosphere that precedes a lightning strike. I was staying at a small motel on the edge of Briar Glen, having decided that sleeping in my grandmother's empty, looted house was doing more damage to my psyche than I could afford. The motel was cheap and smelled of stale cigarettes, but it was neutral ground. On Wednesday morning, I went to the front desk to check for mail. I had forwarded my grandmother's mail to a P.O.A. box, but I had given the motel address to Sophie for legal correspondence. The clerk, a bored teenager with blue hair, handed me a single white envelope. There was no return address. The postmark was local, stamped in Briar Glen the previous day. I took it back to my room, sitting on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled slightly. I expected another threat. I expected another note telling me to stop digging or face consequences. I tore open the flap. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a photocopy, grainy and slightly crooked, as if taken in a hurry. It wasn't a full page. It was just the bottom right corner of a document. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. At the top of the fragment, cut off by the jagged edge of the paper, were the words, "Last Will and Testament." Below that was a date, September 21st, and below the date was a signature, Eleanor Marie Collins. I knew that signature better than my own. I knew the loop of the E, the sharp strike of the C. It was shaky, She had been frail in those last weeks, but it was undeniably hers. I ran my thumb over the photocopy. It was real. It wasn't a draft. It wasn't a note. It was the execution page of a will signed less than 2 weeks before she died. Someone had copied it before it was destroyed or hidden. Someone inside the circle of corruption had a conscience, or perhaps just a grudge. I grabbed my phone and dialed Sophie. "I have proof," I said as soon as she picked up. "What kind of proof?" Sophie asked, her voice sharp and alert. "A photocopy," I said. "It was mailed anonymously. It shows the header and her signature. Dated September 21st. "Bring it to me," Sophie said. "Now." I drove to Stonebrook with the envelope on the passenger seat like a delicate explosive. When I arrived at Sophie's office, she examined the paper under a magnifying lamp. She didn't smile, but the set of her jaw tightened. "This changes the burden," she said. "This isn't just a fishing expedition anymore. We have a date. We have a document type. If they deny this exists, they are walking into a trap." She sat at her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I am issuing subpoenas today," she said. "We are going to carpet bomb them. I want the file logs from Hale and Mercer. I want their scanning records. Law firms scan everything. Even if they shredded the physical copy, the metadata might still be on their server." "What about the bank?" I asked. "The bank is next," Sophie said. "I am subpoenaing Harbor and Pine for the safe deposit access logs and the surveillance retention notices. We need to know who went into that vault and exactly when." She looked up at me. "Madeline, this is the point of no return. Once these subpoenas land, your family will know you are not just bluffing. They will panic, and people who panic make mistakes. I want them to panic." I said. I left Sophie's office feeling a grim sense of purpose. I had the smoking gun. Now I just needed to find the bullet. I had to file a form at the Briar Glen courthouse regarding the estate petition. The courthouse was a beautiful old brick building in the center of town, usually a place of quiet bureaucracy. But as I walked down the marble steps toward the parking lot, I saw a familiar figure leaning against my car. It was Uncle Gordon. He was wearing a camel hair coat and sunglasses, looking like a man who owned the pavement he stood on. He didn't move as I approached. He just watched me. "Hello?" "Uncle Gordon?" I said, stopping 5 feet away. "You are making a lot of noise." "Madeline," he said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it carried a venom that made my skin crawl. "I am just following the law," I said, unlike some people. Gordon took off his sunglasses. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked tired, aged by 10 years in the last week. "You think you are smart," he said. "You think because you went to college in the city and got a little job that you understand how the world works. But you don't. You are playing with things that can hurt you." "Is that a threat?" I asked, because I am already keeping a log of those. "It is advice," he said, stepping closer. "You don't know what you are messing with. This isn't just about a few dollars in a bank account. You are pulling threads that are tied to things you cannot handle." "Like what?" I asked. "Like the fact that you emptied her safe deposit box 2 days after she died?" Gordon's face twitched. A small, involuntary spasm near his eye. "Drop the petition. Madeline," he hissed. "Take the settlement. I can get Evan to bump it up to 200,000. But that is it. If you push this to a hearing, I will bury you. I will make sure you never work in this state again." I looked him in the eye. I realized then that he wasn't just greedy. He was desperate. He was a man standing on a ledge, trying to convince me he was flying. "You better get a good lawyer." "Gordon," I said, "because mine is already subpoenaing the bank footage." The color drained from his face. For a second, I thought he might strike me. His hand clenched into a fist at his side. But then he laughed. A dry, humorless sound. "Footage," he muttered. "Good luck with that." He turned and walked away, his stride stiff and angry. I got in my car and locked the doors. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was pounding from adrenaline. He had just confirmed it. You don't know what you are messing with. He had admitted there was something to hide. 2 days later, the initial returns from the subpoenas began to trickle in. Sophie called me into her office on a rainy Friday afternoon. Her desk was covered in papers. "We have a problem, and we have a breakthrough." Sophie said, "Give me the problem first." I said, "The problem is Hale and Mercer." She said, "The law firm. They are claiming attorney-client privilege on almost everything, blocking us at every turn. But that is not the strange part." "What is the strange part?" "The attorney assigned to your grandmother, Daniel Mercer, the one who wouldn't take your call." "Yes, he is gone," Sophie said. According to the firm's response, Daniel Mercer took an immediate medical leave starting October 11th. October 11th, I repeated. That was the day after the funeral, the day after I started asking questions. "Exactly," Sophie said. "A partner at a law firm doesn't just vanish on medical leave in the middle of a probate case unless something catastrophic has happened, or unless he is being paid to disappear." I thought about the email I had found. I need to make sure my executor cannot be bullied. Eleanor trusted him. If he was gone, they had gotten to him. "What is the breakthrough?" I asked. Sophie slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a printout of a digital log from Harbor and Pine Federal Credit Union, the safe deposit box access log. She said, I looked at the data. October 6th, 9:15 a.m. User, Gordon Collins. October 6th, 9:15 a.m. Accompanied by Employee ID 4472. I looked up. Who is Employee 4472? Sophie smiled grimly. We cross-referenced it with the bank's personnel roster provided in the discovery dump. It belongs to a man named Thomas Rooker. He isn't a loan officer. He isn't a manager. Who is he? He is the head of physical security for the branch. Sophie said. I frowned. Why would the head of security go into the vault with my uncle? Sophie leaned back. Exactly. Usually, a customer is accompanied by a vault attendant. They use two keys, the customer's key and the bank's master key. But security personnel only get involved if there is a problem, or if the customer doesn't have a key. If Gordon didn't have the key, I started, then they drilled the box. Sophie finished, or they used an override. If Gordon claimed he lost the key, there is a protocol, forms to sign, notaries, a waiting period, but there is no record of a lost key drill out, which means Thomas Rooker let him in off the books. Collusion. I said. It looks like it, Sophie said. And if a bank employee helped loot a deceased client's box without a court order, the bank is liable. That is why they are terrified. I need to talk to Daniel Mercer. I said, You can't. Sophie said, He is on medical leave. His lawyer said he is unavailable for deposition due to severe stress and anxiety. I don't care about his anxiety. I said, I care about the truth. Where does he live? Sophie hesitated. I cannot tell you to go harass a potential witness. Madeline, I am not asking you to tell me to do it. I said, I am asking if his address is in the public record. Sophie looked at me for a long moment. Then she turned her computer screen toward me. Daniel Mercer owns a house in Stonebrook, she said. But according to a recent credit header update we pulled, he is currently receiving mail at a rental property in Northwood, a small cabin near the lake. I memorized the address. I drove to Northwood that evening. It was a 40-minute drive into the deep woods, where the houses were spaced far apart and the roads were unpaved. The rental cabin was small, with peeling paint and a car parked in the driveway that hadn't moved in days. I walked up to the door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again. Harder. Mr. Mercer? It is Madeline Collins, Eleanor's granddaughter. I heard movement inside. A heavy step, then silence. I know you're in there. I called out. I am not going away. I know about the email she sent you. I know you were supposed to protect her. The door opened a crack. The chain was still on. A face appeared in the gap. It was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale and clammy. He was unshaven, wearing a stained t-shirt. This was a named partner of a prestigious law firm. He looked like a fugitive. Go away, he rasped. I can't do that. I said, They are destroying everything. Mr. Mercer. They emptied the house. They emptied the bank box. And now they are saying she died intestate. You know that is a lie." His hand gripped the doorframe. I saw it shaking, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. "Please," he whispered. "You don't understand." "What don't I understand?" I asked. "Did they pay you? Did they threaten you?" Daniel Mercer looked past me, scanning the trees, scanning the road. He was terrified. "I can't talk to you," he said. "You were her lawyer," I shouted, losing my patience. "She trusted you. She wrote to you specifically because she was afraid of this exact situation." He flinched at my volume. He looked at me, and for a second, the fear in his eyes was replaced by a deep, crushing shame. "Your grandmother left instructions," he said, his voice barely audible. "What instructions? Where is the will?" "They weren't supposed to reach me," he said. "What?" "The instructions," he said, his voice cracking. "They weren't supposed to reach me. They intercepted them. Before I could file." He was talking in riddles. Intercepted what? "Mr. Mercer, please." He slammed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I stood there on the porch, staring at the wood. They weren't supposed to reach me. He wasn't saying he lost the will. He was saying he never got the final version, or that the instructions for what to do with it were intercepted. I walked back to my car, my mind racing. If Mercer didn't have the will, then who did? And if they intercepted her instructions, that meant they were monitoring her communications long before she died. I called Sophie from the car. "He is terrified." I said, "He said instructions were intercepted. He implied he never got the package she intended for him." "That is good," Sophie said. "It explains why he ran. He knows negligence when he sees it. If he knew she was trying to send him something and he failed to secure it, he is liable. I am filing an emergency motion to preserve evidence tonight." "What does that do?" "It is a court order demanding that everyone, the bank, the facility, the law firm, and your family, preserve all data, no deleting emails, no shredding papers. If they destroy anything after this order is served, they go to jail. We need to stop the bleeding." I drove back to Briar Glen feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and adrenaline. I went to my grandmother's house. I needed to pick up some of my clothes that I had left there before moving to the motel. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw a police cruiser parked in front of the house. Blue lights were flashing silently against the dark house. My stomach dropped. I got out of the car. An officer was standing on the porch. My Aunt Tricia was there, too, wrapped in a fur coat, pointing at the door. "There she is," Tricia shouted as I approached. "That is her." The officer walked toward me. "Ma'am, are you Madeline Collins?" "Yes," I said. "What is going on?" "We received a call reporting a burglary in progress," the officer said, "and a complaint of trespassing." "Trespassing?" I looked at Tricia. "This is my grandmother's house. I have a key." "Not anymore," Tricia said, her voice shrill. "You are not the executor. You have no legal right to be here. We believe you are stealing property from the estate." I looked at the officer. "Stealing property?" "Mrs. Collins here claims that several valuable items are missing from the home." The officer said, "Silverware, jewelry. She claims you have been removing them." I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Officer," I said, reaching into my bag, "do you have a timestamp on your body camera?" He frowned. "Yes." "Great. Because I want to show you something." I pulled out my phone and opened the gallery. "I took these photos the day I arrived," I said, holding the screen up for him to see. "The day of the funeral. Look at the date. October 10th. Look at the time. 2 p.m. I scrolled through the images, the empty mantelpiece, the empty drawers, the bare walls where paintings used to hang. The house was stripped before I even set foot in it. I said, "My aunt and uncle cleared this place out 2 days before I arrived. If anyone is stealing from the estate, it is them." The officer looked at the photos, then back at Tricia. Tricia's face had gone pale. She pulled her coat tighter. "Well, we just want to make sure everything is secure," she stammered. "She is unstable. We don't want her damaging the house." The officer handed me back my phone. He looked annoyed. "This looks like a civil matter." "Folks, but I want her removed," Tricia insisted. "Ma'am, she has a key, and there is no court order barring her from the premises. The officer said, "If you want to evict her, go to court. Until then, stop calling 911 for family disputes." He got in his cruiser and drove away. I stood on the driveway, looking at Tricia. She looked small and vicious. "You are pathetic," I said, "trying to get me arrested?" "Really?" Tricia sneered. "You are ruining everything. Madeline, you are going to burn this family to the ground if the family is built on a lie." "Tricia, then let it burn." She got in her car and sped off. I unlocked the front door and went inside. My hands were shaking again. They were escalating. They were trying to criminalize me. I walked into the kitchen. I needed water. I stood in the dark pantry, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the pantry. I looked down at the floor, in the corner, behind the heavy sack of potatoes I hadn't moved in days. The baseboard looked slightly uneven. I remembered something from my childhood. I was 10 years old. I was playing hide and seek. I had hidden in this pantry. My grandmother had found me. But instead of telling me to come out, she had smiled and shown me a trick. "This is where I keep my emergency cash." "Maddie," she had whispered, behind the board. I hadn't thought about that in 20 years. I knelt down. I pushed the potato sack aside. I dug my fingernails into the top of the wooden molding. It was loose. I pulled. The piece of wood popped off with a soft creak. Behind it was a small hollow space between the studs. I reached in. My fingers brushed against dust and cobwebs. I felt around. Paper. I pulled it out. It wasn't money. It was a small, black spiral notebook, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $2. I stood up and walked into the kitchen light. I opened the notebook. It was a log. Her handwriting. August 15th. Gordon stopped by, asked about the bank accounts again. I told him nothing. August 20th. Tricia called, asking if I had updated the deed. I hung up. September 1st. I don't trust them. They are watching the mail. I saw Evan going through my recycling bin. I turned the pages, my heart hammering. She had documented everything, the pressure, the suspicion, and then the last entry. Dated September 25th, I signed the new will today. I didn't use the firm's notary. I didn't trust them to keep it quiet. I called a mobile service, met her at the coffee shop down the street from the center, and then, below that, a single line, underlined twice. "If they hide my will, follow the notary." I stared at the page. She hadn't used the nursing home notary. She hadn't used the law firm. She had gone rogue. She had gone to a coffee shop. Follow the notary. I didn't have a name, but I had a location, and I had a date. September 25th. I closed the notebook and shoved it into my jacket pocket. I had the map. Now I just had to find the treasure. And God help anyone who tried to stop me. The notebook I found behind the baseboard in my grandmother's pantry was small, but it felt as heavy as a brick in my pocket. If they hide my will, follow the notary. It was a directive from the grave, a breadcrumb trail left by a woman who knew she was being hunted by her own kin. I brought the notebook to Sophie's office the next morning. She read the entry silently, her eyes scanning the shaky handwriting. September 25th. Sophie read aloud. She didn't use the firm's notary. She called a mobile service. "We need to find this woman." I said, "There can't be that many mobile notaries in a town the size of Briar Glen." Sophie turned to her computer. "Actually, we already have a lead. I cross-referenced the vendor payments from Seabrook Care Pavilion. They use a roving notary service for their residents. A woman named Rita Halden. Is it the same person?" I asked. "It fits the timeline." Sophie said, "Rita Halden invoiced Seabrook on September 25th, and again on October 2nd. If your grandmother was looking for someone independent, she might have asked the staff for a recommendation, or perhaps she just called the number she saw on a flyer in the lobby." We found Rita Halden's office in a strip mall in Stonebrook, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a discount vape shop. It was a depressing little room with fluorescent lighting and a smell of stale coffee. Rita herself was a nervous woman in her 50s, wearing a cardigan that seemed too big for her. She looked like someone who had spent her life trying to be invisible. When we walked in, she looked up from her desk. her eyes widening behind thick glasses. "Can I help you?" she asked. "My name is Sophie Langford," Sophie said, placing her business card on the desk. "This is Madeline Collins. We are investigating the estate of Eleanor Collins." Rita's face went blank, the kind of blank that takes effort. "I don't know that name," she said quickly. "I see a lot of people." I stepped forward. "She was a resident at Seabrook Care Pavilion. You invoiced the facility on September 25th. We know you were there." Rita picked up a stack of papers and tapped them on the desk. A nervous tick. "I do a lot of work at Seabrook. Standard forms, powers of attorney, medical directives. I don't remember specific clients." Sophie leaned in, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Ms. Halden, we are not here for standard forms. We have evidence that you notarized a document for Eleanor Collins shortly before her death. We also have evidence that this document has since disappeared. I don't know what you are talking about," Rita said, her voice rising in pitch. "I am a notary. I verify identity. I don't read the documents. That is the law." Sophie pulled a folded paper from her briefcase. "It was a subpoena. I expected you might say that." Sophie said, "This is a subpoena for your logbook. In Massachusetts, you are required to keep a journal of all notarial acts. If you don't produce it right now, I will have the sheriff here within the hour to seize it." Rita stared at the subpoena. Her hands began to shake. She looked at the door, as if calculating her odds of running past us. I don't want any trouble," she whispered. "Then tell us the truth," I said. "My grandmother trusted you." Rita slumped in her chair. She looked defeated. "It was weird," she said softly. "It was the weirdest signing I ever did." "Tell us," Sophie said. Rita took a deep breath. "I was called to Seabrook by the administrator, Kendra Mott. She said she had a resident who needed to sign some time-sensitive papers. When I got there, Mrs. Collins was in her room. She looked tired, but she was alert. And?" I pressed. "Kendra wouldn't leave the room," Rita said. "Usually, I ask family and staff to step out so I can verify willingness, but Kendra insisted on staying. She said Mrs. Collins was a fall risk. That is a violation of protocol," Sophie noted. "I know," Rita said miserably, "but Kendra gives me a lot of business. I didn't want to rock the boat. But here's the part that kept me up at night. When Kendra put the document on the table for Mrs. Collins to sign, she kept her hand on the top half of the paper. She kept it face down." "Face down?" I asked. "She had the top pages folded over," Rita explained. "All I could see was the signature block. Mrs. Collins tried to reach for the paper, to read it, and Kendra pulled it back. She said, 'We already discussed this. Eleanor, just sign so we can get the funds released for your care.'" I felt a cold rage spreading through my chest. Kendra Mott wasn't just a bystander, she was an enforcer. "Did my grandmother sign it?" I asked. She stared at Kendra for a long time. Rita said, "She looked trapped." Then she looked at me. She asked, "Are you an honest woman, Rita?" And I said yes. And then she signed. But she didn't look happy. She looked like she was making a move on a chessboard she didn't like. Sophie was taking furious notes. "Did you see what the document was?" "No," Rita said. "But the header, I saw the edge of it when Kendra flipped the page. It said revocation." "Revocation of what?" Sophie asked. "I don't know," Rita said. "Maybe a previous will? Maybe a trust?" But the way they handled it, it felt like a robbery in plain sight. We left Rita's office with a copy of her logbook entry. It confirmed the date, September 25th. It confirmed the location, and now we had testimony that the facility administrator had physically obscured the document from the signer. "That is duress," Sophie said as we got into her car. "That invalidates whatever she signed. But the fact that they forced her to sign a revocation suggests they knew there was an existing will they needed to kill." We went back to Sophie's office. She started digging through the mountain of discovery documents that Seabrook Care Pavilion had finally produced after our emergency motion. "Look at this," Sophie said, pointing to a spreadsheet on her screen. It was the visitor log for Seabrook. They tried to redact the names, claiming privacy, but they did a poor job. Sophie said, "They just blacked out the last names. But look at the pattern." I looked. September 10th. Gordon C. Meeting with admin. September 15th. Gordon C. Meeting with admin. September 20th. Gordon C. Meeting with admin. He wasn't visiting his mother. I said, "He was visiting Kendra." "Exactly." Sophie said, "He was coordinating with the administrator." And look at the duration. These meetings were 40 minutes, an hour. They were planning the suppression. They were building the wall around her. But there was more. Sophie pulled up a document from the probate court filings. While we were chasing the will, they made a move we missed. Sophie said, she slid a document toward me. "Petition for temporary administration." "What is this?" I asked. "It is a legal backdoor," Sophie said grimly. "They filed this 4 days after she died. They claimed that there was an immediate need to access estate funds to secure property and pay urgent debts. The court granted it because there was no competing petition on file yet. Named administrator, Gordon Collins. This is how they got into the bank. I realized. This gave him the legal cover." "Technically, yes," Sophie said, "but a temporary administrator has limited powers. They are only supposed to preserve assets, not distribute them. They certainly aren't allowed to drill open safe deposit boxes and remove the contents without a specific court order and an inventory. He used a limited key to open a door he wasn't supposed to touch. We need an expert," I said. "If they forced her to sign a revocation, or if they forged documents to get this administration granted, we need to prove it." Sophie nodded. "I am hiring a forensic document examiner, the best in the state. If they faked a single stroke of a pen, he will find it." 2 days later, we met with the examiner, a man named Dr. Eris, who worked out of a lab that looked more like a hospital operating room. He had high-resolution scanners and microscopes everywhere. He had been analyzing a document that Gordon had submitted to the bank, a beneficiary update form dated October 1st. October 1st. I said, "She was in a coma on October 1st. She died on the 4th. "Exactly." "Dr. Eris said. He pulled up an image on a large monitor. "Look at the signature," he said. "It looked like my grandmother's signature. To the naked eye. It was perfect. Now, look at the pressure points." "Dr. Eris said, zooming in until the ink looked like a river. "When a person writes naturally, the pressure varies. There is a rhythm. Heavy on the downstroke, light on the upstroke." He clicked a button, and the image changed to a heat map of ink density. "This signature has uniform pressure throughout," he said. "It is flat. That happens when someone is tracing. They are moving the pen slowly, carefully following a line. They are drawing the signature, not writing it." "It is a forgery?" I asked. "It is a cut-and-paste simulation." "Dr. Eris corrected. "I believe they took a genuine signature from an old check, projected it or traced it, and then inked it over. But they made a mistake." "What mistake?" Sophie asked. "The ink," Dr. Eris said. "We did a chemical analysis of the ink on the form. It is a gel-based ink, highly specific. We found the same ink formulation on a witness signature on the same page." "Who was the witness?" I asked. "Evan Collins." Dr. Eris said, "My cousin Evan. He had signed as a witness to the forgery, using the same pen that was used to fake my grandmother's name." "They are sloppy," Sophie said, a shark-like grin appearing on her face. "They are arrogant, and they are sloppy. This is a felony. Madeline, this is uttering a forged instrument." I went back to the motel that night, my head spinning. We had them. We had the notary. We had the visitor logs. We had the forensic proof of forgery. I was sitting on the bed, eating a cold sandwich, when there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole. It was Evan. I didn't open the door. "What do you want?" "Evan?" I called out. "Maddie, please," he said. "I just want to talk. No lawyers, no parents, just us." I hesitated. Sophie had told me not to engage, but curiosity is a dangerous thing. I wanted to see his face. I wanted to see if he knew the walls were closing in. I opened the door but left the chain on. "Talk," I said. He looked terrible. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie, trying to look like the boy I grew up with, not the man who had looted a funeral home. He held up a manila envelope. "I found these at the house," he said, before everything got crazy. "I thought you should have them." He slid the envelope through the crack in the door. I took it. I opened it. They were photos, Polaroids from the 90s. Me and Evan building a snow fort. Me and Evan at the beach, buried in sand. My grandmother laughing, holding both of us in her lap. I looked at her face in the photo. She looked so happy, so alive. "Why are you giving me these?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Because I miss us," Evan said. His eyes were wet. "Maddie, this is killing the family. Mom hasn't slept in days. Gordon is falling apart. Is this what Grandma would have wanted? Us fighting in court? Tearing each other apart over money?" He was good. He was using the one weapon he knew I was vulnerable to. Guilt. "She would hate this. Maddie," he continued, his voice cracking. "She wanted us to be a family. Just drop the lawsuit. Take the money we offered. We can find a way to fix this. We can go back to how it was." For a second, just a second, I felt the pull, the desperate desire to stop the fighting, to just take the photos and the money and go home. I looked at the picture of us in the snow. We looked so innocent, but then I looked closer at the photo. I saw the date stamped on the back. December, 1998. I remembered that day. Gordon had yelled at Evan for hours because he lost a mitten. He had called him stupid. He had made him cry. And Grandma had taken us inside and given us hot chocolate and told Gordon to shut his mouth. She defended us. She protected us from them. And now, Evan was using her memory to protect the people who had stolen her dignity. I looked up at Evan. The tears in his eyes were real. I thought, but they weren't tears of love. They were tears of self-preservation. "You are right, Evan," I said. "Grandma would hate this." He exhaled, looking relieved. "Exactly. So let's just—" "She would hate that her grandson forged her signature on a bank form," I said, cold and sharp. Evan froze. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "She would hate that you stole from her safe deposit box while her body was still warm." I continued. "She would hate that you and your father bullied a dying woman into signing a revocation she couldn't read because Kendra Mott held the pages face down." Evan took a step back. His face went from tragic to terrified in a heartbeat. You don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "I know about the gel pen." "Evan," I said, "Dr. Aris sends his regards." Evan stared at me for 1 second longer, then turned and practically ran to his car. I closed the door and locked it. I looked at the photos again. I didn't cry. I put them in my suitcase. They were evidence now. Evidence of who we used to be, before greed ate them alive. The next morning, Sophie called me. Her voice was electric. "We got the bank footage," she said. I drove to her office in record time. Sophie had the stills printed out on large foam boards, ready for court. "Exhibit A," she said, pointing to the first image. It was grainy black and white CCTV footage. The timestamp read, October 6th, 9:14 a.m. We saw 2 men walking down the corridor toward the vault. One was clearly Uncle Gordon. He was wearing the same suit he wore to the wake later that day. The other man was wearing a bank uniform. He was tall, broad-shouldered. He was walking slightly ahead of Gordon, scanning the hallway. "Thomas Rooker," Sophie said, "head of security." "Exhibit B," she said, pointing to the next image. 9:30 a.m. They were leaving the vault. Gordon was carrying something. It wasn't a box. It was a slim yellow envelope. He had it tucked under his arm, pressed tight against his ribs. A slim envelope. I whispered, "A will," Sophie said, "or a trust deed." "It is exactly the right size for a legal document folder. If they took the will," I said, "then they destroyed it." "Maybe," Sophie said, "but look at the next image." She pointed to a third board. It was an exterior shot from the bank's parking lot camera. Gordon was getting into his car, but he wasn't alone. Trisha was in the passenger seat. And in the back seat? Evan. The whole family was there. I said, "It was a heist. It was a conspiracy," Sophie corrected. "And now we have the visual proof that they removed a document from a secured box 2 days after death without a court order. This is spoliation of evidence. This is theft. But we still don't have the will itself." I said, "We can prove they took something, but they will claim it was, I don't know, old love letters or cash. We needed the will, or at least, we needed to know where it went." That afternoon, I went to the public library. I needed a quiet place to think, away from the motel. I was sitting in the back corner, staring at the rain against the window, when my phone buzzed. It was Nora Vance, my grandmother's neighbor. "Maddie," she said, her voice breathless. "I need to tell you something. I have been holding it in, but I can't anymore. Not after I saw the police at the house." "What is it, Nora?" I asked. "The envelope," she said. "The one you got in the mail? With the photocopy?" "Yes." "I sent it," she said. "I nearly dropped the phone." "You? But where did you get it?" "I found it," she said, "at the library." "The library?" "I volunteer there on Tuesdays," Nora explained. "I was emptying the book return bin outside. You know, the metal slot on the sidewalk?" "Yes." "Someone had shoved a book in there. It was a copy of The Great Gatsby, but it wasn't one of our books. It was a personal copy, and sticking out of it was that piece of paper. It looked like someone had used it as a bookmark and forgot to take it out. Or maybe they were trying to throw it away and panicked when they saw someone coming, so they just shoved it in the slot." I closed my eyes, picturing it, Evan or Gordon, walking down Main Street with the evidence they had stolen. Maybe they intended to shred it. Maybe they were arguing. Maybe they heard a siren and dumped it in the first metal box they saw. It was torn. Nora said, "It looked like garbage. But when I pulled it out, I saw Eleanor's signature. I knew you were looking for answers. I didn't want to get involved. I was scared of your uncle, but I couldn't destroy it, so I mailed it to you. Thank you." "Nora," I said, "you have no idea what you have done." I called Sophie immediately. We have the chain of custody. I said, "Someone from the family dumped the scrap in a library book drop. It proves they had possession of the document and tried to dispose of it in a public place." Sophie filed the motion for sanctions the next morning. It was a scorched earth filing. We alleged will suppression, spoliation of evidence, fraud, and conspiracy. We attached the affidavits from Rita Halden, the forensic report from Dr. Aris, the bank footage stills, and the visitor logs from Seabrook. The court scheduled an evidentiary hearing for the following Monday, that Friday. The phone rang in Sophie's office while we were prepping. It was Calhoun Reed, the expensive litigator my family had hired. Sophie put it on speaker. "Sophie," Calhoun said, his voice smooth and deeply condescending. "Look, we have seen the latest filing. It is very dramatic, very creative. Save the adjectives." "Calhoun," Sophie said, "what do you want?" "My clients are tired. Sophie, they are grieving. They want this to end. They are willing to increase the settlement offer." "How much?" Sophie asked. $1.2 million, Calhoun said. The room went silent. 1.2 million? It was life-changing money. It was quit your job and buy a house money. "And in exchange?" Sophie asked. "Full dismissal with prejudice," Calhoun said. "And a non-disclosure agreement. Madeline never speaks about the estate. The bank, or the family again. She walks away rich, and everyone moves on." Sophie looked at me. She muted the phone. "It is a lot of money. Madeline," she said, "and court is a gamble. Even with all this evidence, a judge could just order them to return the assets. We might not find the actual will. You could spend years fighting this." I looked at the speakerphone. I thought about the face-down paper. I thought about the scratched desk. I thought about Evan trying to manipulate me with childhood photos. I thought about the fear in Daniel Mercer's eyes. They were buying my silence. They were buying their way out of a felony. If I took the money, I was saying that the truth had a price tag. I was saying that my grandmother's dignity was worth $1.2 million. I leaned forward and unmuted the phone. "Mr. Reed?" I said. "Reed?" Yes, Madeline? He asked. I assume you are sensible enough to accept. I am sensible, I said, which is why I know that if you are offering 1.2 million, the estate is worth at least 10. There was a silence on the other end. But that isn't why I am refusing. I continued. I don't want the money. Mr. Reed, I want the will. I want the document your client stole from the vault. That is an absurd accusation. Calhoun sputtered. Save it for the judge. I said, the answer is no. See you in court. I hung up the phone. Sophie looked at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. You just turned down $1 million, she said. I didn't turn it down, I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. I just decided to go get the rest of it, and I'm going to take it from them in public. For the first time in this entire nightmare, I didn't feel like the victim. I didn't feel like the responsible, forgettable one. I felt dangerous. I felt like the person my grandmother knew I could be. The quiet one was done being quiet. The hearing took place on a Tuesday. Under a sky so heavy with gray clouds, it felt like the ceiling of the world had lowered. The Briar Glen Probate Court was a building designed to intimidate, all dark mahogany wainscoting and portraits of long-dead judges who stared down at the proceedings with stern disapproval. I arrived early with Sophie. We sat at the plaintiff's table, organizing our binders. My hands were steady. A week ago, I had been shaking in a motel room. Today, I felt a strange, cold calm. I was no longer the granddaughter begging for scraps of memory. I was the plaintiff, and I had brought the receipt. My family arrived 10 minutes late, a power move designed to show they weren't worried. Uncle Gordon led the phalanx, wearing a navy suit that cost more than my car. Aunt Tricia was beside him, looking pale and fragile, playing the role of the grieving daughter to perfection. Evan trailed behind them, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. They were flanked by Calhoun Reed, their attorney from Boston. Reed was a man who took up space. He had a booming voice and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He dumped his briefcase on the defense table with a heavy thud, glancing at Sophie with a look of amused tolerance. All rise, the bailiff announced. Judge Holloway entered. He was an older man with a face like a crumpled paper bag and eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human greed imaginable. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at the two tables. We are here on the matter of the estate of Eleanor Collins, Judge Holloway said, his voice gravelly. We have a petition to compel production of a will and a counter-motion for sanctions alleging spoliation of evidence. Mr. Reed, you may begin. Reed stood up, buttoning his jacket. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth as aged scotch. This entire proceeding is a tragedy. We have here a family in deep mourning, dragged into court by a disappointed relative. Ms. Madeline Collins is understandably upset that her grandmother died without leaving a will. It happens. It is unfortunate, but instead of accepting the reality of intestate succession, which treats everyone fairly, she has concocted a conspiracy theory worthy of a spy novel. She claims hidden documents, secret meetings, and bank heists. It is fantasy. Your Honor, it is the lashing out of a young woman who is unstable and grieving. I stared straight ahead. Unstable. There was that word again. Sophie stood up next. She didn't use adjectives. She didn't use emotional appeals. She used dates. Your Honor, Sophie said, her voice clear and cutting. On October 4th, Eleanor Collins died. On October 6th, 2 days later, her safe deposit box was drilled open and emptied by Gordon Collins, who had no legal authority to do so. On October 11th, the attorney who drafted her estate plan vanished on medical leave. On October 12th, the facility where she died deleted 3 months of email archives. This is not a theory. These are facts, and we intend to prove that a will existed and that the respondents destroyed it. The judge looked at Gordon. Gordon didn't flinch, but Tricia shifted in her seat. Call your first witness, Judge Holloway said. We called Rita Halden. Rita looked smaller than she had in her office. She sat in the witness box, clutching her purse in her lap. When the clerk swore her in, her voice was a whisper. Sophie walked toward her. Ms. Halden, You are a notary public, correct? Yes, Rita said. And on September 25th, did you visit Seabrook Care Pavilion? I did. Did you meet with Eleanor Collins? Yes. Sophie placed the logbook copy on the projector. Ms. Halden, please tell the court what happened in that room. Rita took a breath. She looked at Kendra Mott, who was sitting in the back row of the gallery, looking bored. Rita swallowed hard. I was called by the administrator. Kendra Mott, she said. She told me Mrs. Collins needed to sign some time-sensitive papers. When I got there, Mrs. Collins was in bed. She looked weak. Did you verify the document she was signing? Sophie asked. Rita looked down at her hands. No, why not? Because Ms. Mott told me not to, Rita said, her voice trembling. She said Mrs. Collins was fatigued and we needed to hurry. She said it was just standard financial releases. And the document itself? Sophie pressed. Was it fully visible? No, Rita admitted. Ms. Mott held it. She kept the top half folded down. She said, just sign here, Eleanor. Sophie let the silence hang in the room. So, Sophie said slowly, you notarized a signature on a document you couldn't see, for a woman who was being physically managed by the facility administrator? Yes, Rita whispered. I didn't want to upset a dying woman. I thought I was helping. Judge Holloway leaned forward. Ms. Halden, do you realize that notarizing a document under those conditions is a violation of your commission? I know. Your Honor, Rita said, tears spilling over. I am so sorry. Reedy didn't even cross-examine her. He knew that attacking a crying, apologetic woman would only make his clients look worse. He just waved his hand dismissively, as if her testimony was irrelevant. Next, we called Kendra Mott. Kendra walked to the stand with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed her lines in the mirror. She wore a tailored gray suit and projected an air of competent concern. Ms. Mott, Sophie began. You heard the previous testimony. Did you obstruct the document during the signing on September 25th? Kendra smiled, a tight, pitying smile. Absolutely not. Ms. Halden is mistaken. She seemed very nervous that day. I was simply assisting Mrs. Collins, who had severe arthritis. I was holding the paper steady for her. And what was the document? Sophie asked. It was a revocation of power of attorney. Kendra lied smoothly. Mrs. Collins was unhappy with her previous arrangement. I see, Sophie said. She walked back to our table and picked up a piece of paper. Ms. Mott, Sophie said. You claimed in your deposition that you rarely spoke to Gordon Collins outside of brief medical updates. Is that correct? That is correct, Kendra said. Sophie placed the visitor logs on the projector. Then can you explain why Mr. Collins visited your office privately 9 times in the month of September, including 3 meetings that lasted over an hour? Kendra blinked. Her smile faltered. Well, as I said, Mrs. Collins had complex needs. We had to discuss her care plan. Her care plan required 9 hours of meetings behind closed doors? Sophie asked. And can you explain this? Sophie swapped the document on the projector. It was the recovered email. The one we had pulled from the server backup after the emergency order. From kamott@seabrookcp.com to gcollins@gmail.com. Date, September 28th. Subject, paperwork. Gordon says we need the old papers gone before the firm gets them. Make sure the room is clear on Tuesday. The courtroom went deadly silent. Kendra stared at the screen. Her face turned the color of ash. Ms. Mott? Sophie asked. Who is Gordon? And what old papers needed to be gone? Kendra looked at the back of the courtroom. She looked at Gordon. Gordon was staring straight ahead. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle was jumping in his cheek. He wasn't looking at her. He was abandoning her. Kendra saw it. I saw the moment she realized she was the fall guy. Her composure cracked like a dropped vase. I didn't write that, she stammered. It came from your account, Sophie said. It was deleted 5 minutes after it was sent. But servers don't forget. Ms. Mott. Did Gordon Collins ask you to destroy documents? Kendra looked at the judge, then back at Gordon. Her eyes filled with panic. "He told me it was for her own good," she burst out. "He said Eleanor was confused. He said she was being manipulated by her granddaughter." "Objection," Reed shouted, standing up. "Hearsay. Overruled." Judge Holloway barked. "Continue." "Ms. Mott, he promised to make a donation," Kendra cried, her voice rising to a shriek. "He said if I helped keep things simple, if I helped them handle the transition quietly, he would endow a new wing for the facility. I was trying to help the residents." "And the document she signed on the 25th? Sophie asked relentlessly. "Was it a revocation?" "No," Kendra sobbed. "It was a blank page. He made her sign a blank page so they could print whatever they wanted over it later." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Judge Holloway banged his gavel, his face thunderous. "Order," he roared. "One more outburst and I will clear the courtroom." Reedy looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Gordon was staring at the table, his face a mask of stone. Evan had his head in his hands. Sophie sat down. She didn't need to ask anything else. The next witness was the compliance officer from Harbor and Pine Federal Credit Union, a man named Mr. Henderson. He looked like an undertaker. "Mr. Henderson," Sophie said, "we have records showing that Gordon Collins accessed the safe deposit box on October 6th. Was he an authorized signer on that box?" "No," Henderson said. "The box was solely in the name of Eleanor Collins." "Then how did he get in?" Henderson adjusted his glasses. "According to our internal investigation, launched after we received your subpoena, the access log was manually overridden." "Overridden by whom?" "By the head of physical security, Thomas Rooker," Henderson said. "And I must state for the record that Mr. Rooker's employment has been terminated as of this morning." "Why was it overridden?" Sophie asked. "Mr. Rooker claimed he was persuaded to assist a grieving family member who had lost the key." Henderson said delicately. "Did he drill the box?" "Yes." "And was an inventory taken?" "No." "So," Sophie said, her voice ringing in the quiet room, "the bank allowed an unauthorized person to drill open a deceased woman's vault, remove the contents, and leave without a record of what was taken?" Henderson looked pained. "It appears so. We are cooperating fully with the Banking Commission's investigation." "Thank you," Sophie said. Now came the main event. "We call Gordon Collins to the stand." Gordon stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the stand with a stiff, angry dignity. He looked like a man who believed that if he just acted important enough, the laws of physics and perjury wouldn't apply to him. He was sworn in. "Mr. Collins," Sophie said, standing at the podium, "you heard Ms. Mott's testimony. Did you promise her a donation in exchange for her help in suppressing your mother's will?" Gordon leaned into the microphone. "Absolutely not. Ms. Mott is clearly trying to save her own skin. She is hysterical. I never promised her anything." "And the email?" Sophie asked. "Gordon says we need the old papers gone." "I have no idea what she is talking about," Gordon said smoothly. "I cannot control what a nursing home administrator writes in her private emails." Sophie nodded. "Let us talk about the bank." Then, October 6th, 2 days after your mother died, did you go to Harbor and Pine Federal Credit Union? "I went to the bank to handle some personal business." "Yes," Gordon said. "Did you enter the vault?" "No," Gordon said. I watched him. He said it with total conviction. He was gambling. He was betting that the bank's internal investigation wouldn't be enough to prove he was physically inside the vault room. He thought the override was just a computer glitch he could explain away. "You deny entering the safe deposit box vault?" Sophie asked again. "I deny it," Gordon said. "I was in the lobby. I spoke to a teller. I left." Sophie turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to introduce Plaintiff's Exhibit G." She pointed to the screen. The image appeared. It was the still frame from the corridor camera. October 6th, 9:14 a.m. There was Gordon, clear as day. He was walking down the hallway that led exclusively to the vault. He was walking next to Thomas Rooker. Gordon stared at the screen. He blinked. Sophie clicked a button. The next image appeared. 9:30 a.m. Gordon walking back, carrying the yellow envelope. "Mr. Collins," Sophie said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "If you were in the lobby, Can you explain why you are on the security footage in the restricted vault corridor, accompanied by the head of security, carrying a document envelope? Gordon opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at Reed. Reed was looking down at his notepad, refusing to make eye contact. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. Gordon stammered, I might have gone back to ask a question. You asked a question for 16 minutes? Sophie asked. And you left with an envelope? What was in the envelope? Mr. Collins? Nothing, Gordon snapped, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. It was empty. I was just checking the box. It was empty. So you admit you opened the box? Sophie asked. After you just swore under oath you didn't enter the vault? Gordon's face turned a violent shade of red. I was confused. It has been a stressful time. What was in the envelope? Sophie shouted. The sudden volume made everyone jump. Nothing, Gordon shouted back. There was no will. She didn't leave a will. She wanted me to handle it. She trusted me. Suddenly, there was a noise from the defense table. Stop it. It was Evan. He had stood up. He was shaking. Evan, sit down, Reed hissed, grabbing his arm. No. Evan pulled away. Dad, stop. They have the photos. They have the logs. You are going to go to jail. Evan! Gordon roared from the stand. Shut your mouth. Judge Holloway slammed his gavel down so hard it sounded like a gunshot. Sit down, the judge bellowed. Both of you. Mr. Collins, you will answer the question. What did you remove from the bank? Gordon looked at the judge. He looked at Evan, who was weeping openly now. He looked at me. I looked back at him. I didn't smile. I just watched. I took papers, Gordon whispered. Just old letters, sentimental things. I didn't want them thrown away. You took the will, Sophie said. Didn't you? No, Gordon said. There was no will. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to the judge. Your Honor, Sophie said, the witness claims there was no will. He claims the envelope contained sentimental letters. She walked back to our table and picked up a heavy, sealed package. In that case, Sophie said, he should have no objection to this. She held up the package. It had the logo of Northlake Document Custody stamped on the front. What is that? Reed asked, standing up. We haven't seen this exhibit. Sophie smiled. This, Your Honor, is rebuttal evidence. It arrived this morning via courier. Pursuant to a triggered release clause, she turned to the gallery, then back to Gordon. My client's grandmother, Eleanor Collins, was a woman who prepared for every eventuality. Sophie said, she knew her family. She knew that if she left her will in the house, it would disappear. She knew that if she left it in the bank, her son might find a way to get to it. Sophie ripped the tab on the package. So, on September 25th, the same day she met Rita Halden at a coffee shop to sign her last will and testament, she did one more thing. She mailed a duplicate original to Northlake Document Custody, a secure storage firm in Vermont. Gordon's eyes were bulging out of his head. She gave them strict instructions. Sophie continued, pulling a blue-bound document from the envelope. They were to hold this document in perpetuity. They were only allowed to release it to the court under one specific condition: if a petition was filed claiming she died intestate. Sophie held the document up. This is the will of Eleanor Collins, Sophie announced. She walked to the bench and handed it to the judge. Judge Holloway took the document. He put on his reading glasses. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. He flipped to the back page. He looked at the signature. He looked at the notary seal, Rita Halden's seal. It appears to be in order, Judge Holloway said. He looked up at Gordon, who was gripping the railing of the witness stand like he was on the deck of a sinking ship. Mr. Collins, the judge said, you are still under oath. Do you want to amend your testimony regarding the existence of a will? Gordon made a sound that was half gasp, half sob. He looked at the document in the judge's hand. He knew what it meant. It meant everything he had done. The bribes, the breaking and entering, the forgery, was for nothing. It can't be real. Gordon whispered. She wouldn't. Judge Holloway ignored him. He turned to the terms of the will. Ms. Langford, please read the relevant bequests into the record. Sophie took the document back. She stood in the center of the room. I, Eleanor Marie Collins, being of sound mind, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. She read. Article 3. Disposition of assets. I give, devise, and bequeath the entirety of my estate, including my real property at 12 Elm Street, my investment accounts held at Harbor and Pine, and all personal effects, to the Eleanor Collins Trust. The sole beneficiary of this trust shall be my granddaughter, Madeline Collins. A gasp went through the room. Evan looked up, his face streaked with tears. Tricia put a hand over her mouth. Sophie continued, I estimate the value of these assets to be approximately $5 million. $5 million. I felt the breath leave my lungs. I knew she had money, but I didn't know she had that much. She lived so simply. She clipped coupons. She drove a 10-year-old car. Sophie cleared her throat. She wasn't done. Article 4. The penalty clause. I am aware that my son, Gordon Collins, and my daughter-in-law, Tricia Collins, may attempt to challenge or suppress this document. Therefore, I include the following provision. If any beneficiary or heir attempts to suppress this will, destroy estate documents, or challenge the validity of this will in court without probable cause, they shall be disinherited completely. Furthermore, any costs incurred by my executor in defending against such actions shall be deducted from any statutory share they might otherwise claim. Sophie closed the document. Your Honor, Sophie said, we submit that Gordon Collins, Tricia Collins, and Evan Collins have engaged in a conspiracy to suppress this will, under the terms of the document itself and under Massachusetts law regarding spoliation. They are entitled to nothing. Reed sat down heavily. He didn't even try to object. He looked at his clients with open disgust. Gordon stood there, swaying slightly. He looked at me. Madeline. He croaked. Maddie. Please. We didn't know. We were just trying to protect the family. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had lied to my face at the funeral, the man who had looted the house, the man who had threatened me in the parking lot. You weren't protecting the family. Uncle Gordon, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. You were robbing it. Judge Holloway leaned forward. Mr. Collins, step down, he ordered, and don't leave the building. The bailiff will escort you back to your seat. I am going to make some rulings. Gordon stumbled back to his table. Tricia wouldn't look at him. Evan was staring at the floor. I looked at Sophie. She gave me a small, sharp nod. We had done it. We had silenced them. But as I looked at my broken, corrupt family huddled together in their expensive clothes, I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a heavy, final sadness. The money was safe, but the family was dead. The courtroom was silent, but it was the kind of silence that screams. It was the sound of a vacuum created when all the air is sucked out of a room by a sudden, violent change in pressure. Judge Holloway held the will in his hands, his eyes scanning the penalty clause one last time. He took off his glasses and set them on the bench, a slow, deliberate movement that signaled the end of the debate. He looked at my family. Gordon was slumped in his chair, his expensive suit looking like a costume he no longer knew how to wear. Tricia was staring at a spot on the floor, her hands twisting a tissue into confetti. Evan looked like a child waiting for the principal to expel him. The court finds that the document presented by the plaintiff is the valid last will and testament of Eleanor Collins, Judge Holloway said, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. The court further finds that the respondents, Gordon Collins, Tricia Collins, and Evan Collins, engaged in a willful and coordinated effort to suppress this document. Gordon flinched as if he had been struck. Under Article 4 of the will, the penalty clause is triggered. The judge continued, this court enforces the testator's intent. The respondents are hereby disinherited. They shall receive nothing from the estate, not a dollar, not a piece of furniture, not a single sentimental item. Objection, Reed said weakly, standing up out of habit more than hope. The penalty is excessive. My clients were acting under a misunderstanding of— Sit down. Mr. Reed, the judge snapped. There was no misunderstanding. There was a drill. There was a theft. There was a forgery. This was not confusion. This was malice. The judge turned his gaze back to Gordon. Furthermore, the court is imposing sanctions for spoliation of evidence and contempt of court. The respondents are ordered to pay all legal fees incurred by the plaintiff. Every hour Ms. Langford has billed, every investigator, every forensic expert, you will pay for it. Tricia let out a sob, a sharp, jagged sound. And finally, Judge Holloway said, his voice dropping to a register that made my blood run cold. Because of the testimony regarding the unauthorized access to the safe deposit box, the forgery of bank documents, and the intimidation of a vulnerable adult in a care facility, I am referring this entire transcript to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into criminal fraud, elder abuse, and larceny, criminal fraud. The words hung in the air. This wasn't just about losing money anymore. This was about handcuffs. This was about prison. Gordon looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a panic so raw it was almost hard to look at. He mouthed my name, Madeline. I didn't respond. I didn't look away. But I didn't offer him any comfort. I was done protecting them from the consequences of their own greed. There is one final matter, the judge said. The administration of the estate. He looked at the will. The previous petition for temporary administration granted to Gordon Collins is revoked immediately. However, the court notes that the will does not name Madeline Collins as the primary executor. I blinked. I looked at Sophie. She hadn't mentioned this. The will names Sophie Langford, of the firm Langford and Associates, as the successor executor. The judge read. He looked at the bottom of the page. There is a handwritten note here, initialed by the testator. I fear my family will pressure Madeline. I fear they will bully her into giving up what is hers. Therefore, I appoint a professional to be the shield she cannot be for herself. I felt tears prick my eyes. Grandma knew, even in those final weeks, when she was sick and dying, she knew exactly what they would do to me. She knew I would try to be the peacemaker. She knew I would hesitate to fight, so she hired a mercenary to fight for me. Ms. Langford, do you accept this appointment? The judge asked. I do, Your Honor, Sophie said, standing tall. Then it is so ordered. The hearing is adjourned. The gavel banged down. It was over, or so I thought. We walked out of the courtroom and into the marble hallway. The heavy doors swung shut behind us. I felt a wave of exhaustion hit me, my knees buckling slightly. Sophie put a hand on my elbow to steady me. You did it, she said softly. It is over. But before I could answer, the doors burst open again. My family came out. They didn't look like the defeated defendants anymore. The shock had worn off, replaced by a frantic, cornered rage. You did this, Tricia screamed, her voice echoing in the cavernous hall. She pointed a manicured finger at me. You ungrateful little brat! You ruined us! Tricia, stop, Evan said, trying to grab her arm. But she shook him off. We took you in, Tricia shouted, advancing on me. When your father died, we took you in. We fed you. And this is how you repay us? By sending the police after us? I stood my ground, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. You stole from her, Tricia. You stole from the woman who gave you everything. You don't understand anything, Gordon roared, stepping in front of his wife. He looked terrifying, his face purple with rage. That money was ours. It was family money. You are just a single girl with a cat and a rental apartment. What are you going to do with $5 million? You are going to waste it. Sophie stepped in front of me. Back off. Gordon, don't you talk to me. Gordon spat at her. You are the one who poisoned her against us. You manipulated a senile old woman. He turned back to me, his eyes wild. You think this is over? Madeline, you think you can just walk away with everything? You are going to pay for this. You are going to wish you had taken that settlement. You are going to— He lunged. It wasn't a punch, exactly. It was a grab. He reached for me, his hands clawing at my shoulders, as if he wanted to shake the defiance out of me. I stumbled back. Sophie shoved him hard in the chest. "Don't touch her!" Sophie yelled. 2 court officers who were standing by the metal detectors came running. "Hey, calm down!" one officer shouted, grabbing Gordon by the arms and pinning him against the wall. "Get off me!" Gordon screamed, struggling. "She is my niece! She is a thief!" Tricia was wailing now, a high-pitched keening sound that drew people out of the other courtrooms. Evan was standing by the wall, his face buried in his hands, sliding down until he was crouching on the floor. It was a spectacle. It was the complete and total disintegration of the Collins family image. The prominent developer, the charity board member, reduced to a brawling, screaming mess in a public hallway. Sophie didn't waste a second. She turned to the bailiff who had followed us out. "I want a protective order," she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline but perfectly controlled. "You saw that. He physically assaulted my client. He made verbal threats. You are going to pay for this. That is a threat of retaliation." The bailiff nodded. "I saw it. I will testify to it." Sophie grabbed my arm. "Come with me. We are going back into chambers. We didn't even leave the building." Sophie filed an emergency motion for a restraining order right there, using the incident in the hallway as the predicate act. Because the judge was still in the building, and because the threat was immediate and witnessed by officers of the court, it was granted within the hour. When we walked out of the courthouse 40 minutes later, the police were escorting Gordon and Tricia to their car. They weren't in handcuffs yet, but they were being treated like criminals. Sophie handed me a copy of the order. "This is a no-contact order," she said. "It covers everything. They cannot call you. They cannot text you. They cannot email you. They cannot come within 100 yards of your home or workplace. They cannot ask a third party to contact you. It silences them." I said, looking at the paper. "Effectively, yes," Sophie said. "If they try to reach out, even to say sorry, even to wish you a happy birthday, they go to jail." The judge made it very clear. He is tired of their bullying. I watched as Gordon's car pulled away from the curb. He didn't look at me. He was staring straight ahead, his life dismantling around him. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was lighter than that. It was the feeling of a heavy weight finally being cut loose, leaving me floating, but untethered. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of the hearing rippled outward like a shockwave. It wasn't just my family who fell. It was everyone who had helped them. Harbor and Pine Federal Credit Union was hit hard. The local news picked up the story. Local bank executive fired in estate theft scandal. The bank's board of directors panicked. They froze all accounts associated with Gordon and the estate holding account he had created. They launched a full audit of the branch. The manager was fired. Thomas Rooker, the security chief, was facing criminal charges for burglary. Seabrook Care Pavilion tried to keep it quiet, but the subpoenaed emails were public record now. The state licensing board opened an investigation into the facility. Kendra Mott was suspended without pay, and rumors swirled that she was being investigated for similar schemes with other wealthy residents. She had lost her job, her reputation, and likely her career. It was a small ecosystem of corruption, held together by the assumption that no one would look too closely. They all thought that because I was quiet, I was blind. They thought that because I was family, I would be loyal to the bloodline rather than the truth. They were wrong. A month later, I received an email from Sophie. Subject: Trust Distribution. Madeline. The assets have been consolidated. The accounts are unfrozen and under my control as executor. Per the terms of the Eleanor Collins Trust, the first distribution is ready for transfer. Amount: $5,200,000. Please sign the attached release so I can wire the funds. I sat in my small apartment in the city, staring at the screen. $5 million. It was enough to buy the building I lived in. It was enough to quit my job. It was enough to never worry about a bill again for the rest of my life. I printed the form. I signed it. I scanned it back. I waited for the feeling of triumph. I waited for the rush of victory. I wanted to feel like the hero in a movie who walks away from the explosion in slow motion. But I didn't feel like a hero. I felt tired. I felt a deep, hollow ache in the center of my chest. I had the money, but I had no one to call. I couldn't call my dad. He was gone. I couldn't call Grandma. She was the reason for all of this. And I couldn't call the people who had been my family for 30 years. I had silenced them. I had made the court build a wall between us so high that no voice could carry over it. I walked over to my bookshelf. I pulled down the small black notebook I had found in the pantry, the evidence that had saved me. I opened it to the last page. I had read the instructions about the notary 100 times, but in my haste, in the adrenaline of the investigation, I had missed something written on the inside of the back cover. It was written in pencil, faint and smudged, as if she had written it in a hurry, perhaps on a day when she felt the walls closing in. Maddie. It read, "I know this will be hard. I know they will make you feel like you are the one doing something wrong. They will tell you that family is everything. But family is not blood. Family is how you treat people. I am leaving you this money not because I want you to be rich, but because I want you to be free. Money cannot replace love, but it can replace fear. Don't let them scare you anymore. Love, Grandma." I stared at the words. Money can't replace love, but it can replace fear. She hadn't given me a fortune to spoil me. She had given me a fortress. She knew that without the money, I would always be dependent on their approval. I would always be the poor cousin, the one who had to nod and smile to be invited to dinner. She gave me the power to say no. I sat on the floor of my living room and cried. I cried for the grandmother who had spent her dying days playing spy games because she couldn't trust her own son. I cried for the little girl who used to build snow forts with her cousin Evan, before he became a man who would forge a signature for a payout. I cried for the years of quiet erasure, for all the times I had let them talk over me, let them ignore me, let them treat me like furniture, and I cried because I realized that justice is a lonely thing. Winning doesn't heal the wound. It just cleans it out so it can scar over properly. The sun went down, casting long shadows across my apartment. I eventually stood up and washed my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked different. Older. Maybe. Harder. My phone buzzed on the counter. I walked over to it. I expected it to be Sophie, confirming the wire transfer, but it wasn't. It was a voicemail notification. Missed call. Unknown number. I frowned. My number was unlisted now. Only a few people had it. I pressed play. The voice was crackly, distorted, as if the person was calling from a bad connection or trying to disguise their voice, but I recognized the cadence immediately. It was Evan. "Maddie," he said. His voice sounded wrecked, hoarse. "I know I'm not supposed to call. I know if I get caught, I go to jail. I don't care." There was a pause. I heard him breathing raggedly. I wanted to tell you. You think you found everything. You think the notebook and the will were the end of it. But they weren't. My hand tightened around the phone. "Dad didn't just hide the will," Evan whispered. "He hid something else. Something from before Grandma even got sick. I found a file in his office when we were packing up. It is about you. About your dad." My heart stopped. My dad? He had died in a car accident 10 years ago. What could there be? "I can't keep it," Evan said. "It makes me sick looking at it. But I can't give it to you, not with the order. But if you look in the old boathouse, under the loose floorboard, maybe you will find what really happened." The recording ended with a sharp click. I stood there, frozen, the boathouse, my grandfather's old shed by the lake, on the edge of the property that now belonged to me. What really happened? He was hinting at something darker, something bigger than money. Was he telling the truth? Or was this just another manipulation? Was he trying to bait me into breaking the no-contact order? Was he trying to lure me out to the boathouse to hurt me? Or was it real? Was there one last secret buried in the rot of this family? I looked at the protective order lying on the table. It was my shield. It guaranteed my peace. If I deleted the voicemail, if I ignored it, I could take my $5 million and move to Paris. I could never think about the Collins family again. I could be free. But if I went to the boathouse? I looked at the phone. The little red light was blinking, mocking me. I picked up the protective order. I held it in one hand. I held the phone in the other. Freedom or truth? That was always the choice, wasn't it? I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. I thought about Grandma's note. It can replace fear. I wasn't afraid anymore. I put the paper down. I picked up my keys. I didn't know if I would go to the boathouse tonight. Maybe I would go tomorrow. Maybe I would call Sophie and send the police. But as I stood there, looking at the door, I knew one thing for sure. The story wasn't over. It had just changed authors. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the pen. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Writing this journey of Madeline has been an intense ride, exploring the dark corners of family betrayal and the cold, hard light of justice. It's a reminder that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones we need protection from, and that finding your voice, even if it shakes, is the most powerful thing you can do. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Do you think Madeline should go to the boathouse, or should she take the money and run? And was the justice she got worth the cost of losing her family? Please leave a comment below, letting me know where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of betrayal, revenge, and redemption, please subscribe to Revenge Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Until next time, keep your secrets safe and your will safer.